Aimee Parkinson's work defies easy description or categorization. Over the course of 15 years and 5 books, her work has variously been described as being, quote, invented fables, ghost tales, murder mysteries, as Maria Kapelos says about her 2017 fiction collection, Refrigerated Music for a Gleaming Woman, or, quote, part dark, angry fairy tales, part avant-Gothic myths, part surreal fever dreams. Lance Olson describing her 2019 book, Girl Zoo, which she wrote in collaboration with Carol Guess. Blending narrative and lyric impulses, her work is frequently dark, disturbing, harrowing, but also playful, often very funny, but sometimes not funny, sometimes gaspingly funny. We see this experimentation with narrative even in Blue Train Summer, the first story of her first book, the short story collection Woman with Dark Horses, 2004, which begins, when I first saw the dead girl from far away, she looked like a blue sheet strung out beside the tracks. I knew there was a slim chance that I wasn't the one who killed her. The narrative is less chronological than meditative, the past tense narration moving forward and backward in time from the event, giving the narrative a timeless present. Left ambiguous is the narrator's relationship to the girl or body, the circumstances of whatever prompted the event or events, even the number of girls involved. We also have an introduction to Parkinson's thematic concerns, the suffering of women, usually caused by men, their preoccupation with watching, preoccupation with being watched, legacies of family history, particularly between siblings, the outsider status of criminals, weird twisted desires, but especially women and their beauty and mystery, especially when suffering. This conjures the quote by Edgar Allan Poe in The Philosophy of Composition in 1846. The death, then, of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world. This idea is worked through and critiqued throughout Parkinson's work. Violence against women is often aestheticized. This preoccupation with and ambivalence about this level of aestheticization of suffering women animates much of her work, as in her novel, first novel, The Petals of Your Eyes, a hallucinatory, highly lyrical and fantastical narrative about seemingly captive women held by a director. Or in The Casting Director, in Refrigerated Music for a Gleaming Woman, a world created out of not more than 700 words. Here we see lyrical compression, less narrative, almost a meditation that works through charged moments. These are like 3 separate quotes. While naked in the hospital, Catherine, your name caught in the vortex of the movie business. In those days, there was nothing but terrible love affairs, as if you loved feeling unloved. Sick of feeling unwell, Catherine, and wanted your lovers to destroy your body because someone killed our friend Jackie in September. These themes are present in her most recently published book, Girl Zoo, a collaborative effort with the author Carol Guess. But there is a difference also, an interesting shift. Written during the Trump era, the lyricism of the earlier books dealing with the suffering of women has given way to a biting satire. Each of the 56 short pieces are titled Girl in Blank, like, for example, Girl in Mansion, In Freak Accident, In Rape Kit, In Intelligence Test, to name just a few. The women of these pieces are depicted variously as dolls, animals, test subjects, medical subjects, sex objects, crime victims, criminals, children, mothers, young women, old women, playthings. These works, couched somewhere between prose poem and flash fiction, don't take themselves too seriously, but are also deadly serious. In the words of Lance Olson, Girl Zoo, quote, Girl Zoo is a remarkable collaborative collection of concentrated fictions about 56 captive women who are the same woman, not the same woman, and not the same woman. The rhythms, syntax, vocabulary, and metalogic feel childlike, yet the content remains relentlessly bloody, violent, and dangerous to the bone. In October of this year, Parkinson will publish her 6th book and 2nd novel, Sister Seance. A historical feminist horror novel, Sister Seance takes place in Concord, Massachusetts, just after the Civil War. Spiritualism is sweeping the nation when Halloween calls for matchmaking in a traditional dumb supper, a dinner party where guests may not speak but must express their needs and desires through nonverbal communication. Mysterious intruders shock the party guests into confronting their past through materializations. These materializations unite Sisters of Seance with abolitionists, freed people, former slaveholders, wounded Civil War veterans, and a photographer pregnant with the child of a former slave. Aimee Parkinson's Refrigerated Music for a Gleaming Woman won the FC2 Catherine Doctorow Innovative Fiction Prize and was named one of Brooklyn Rail's best books of 2017. Her newest book, Girl Zoo, is a co-authored experimental fiction about women in captivity. Parkinson writes to explore voices and open doors to unusual journeys through language. Her work has appeared in numerous literary journals, in translation in Italian, and in the Best Small Fictions anthology series. Since 2019, she has served on the FC2 board of directors. Her fiction has won awards, including the Christopher Isherwood Fisher Fellowship, the Kurt Vonnegut Prize from the North American Review, the Statue Prize for Innovative Fiction, the Jack Dyer Prize from Crab Orchard Review, a North Carolina Arts Council Fellowship, a Writer at Work Fellowship, a Puffin Foundation Fellowship, an American Antiquarian Society, William Randolph Hearst Creative Arts Fellowship, and a William Faulkner Literary Competition Prize for the novel. She teaches in the creative writing program at Oklahoma State University. Please welcome Aimee Parkison.
Dan, thank you so much for that introduction. It was such a great introduction. Thank you. And Chris, thank you for everything you've done to make this event happen. It seems like so much has happened between the time that I was supposed to do this event, which was supposed to be in person, and now since that time, I've had 3 new books be accepted and are under contract with 3 different publishers. So the original plan was for me to read just from Girls Zoo, but since I have these other books as well, I'm going to start out reading a piece from Girls Zoo, and then I'll read a chapter from my historical novel. And I'll really watch the time carefully. I shouldn't have any problem with time, because the Girls Zoo pieces, for people that are familiar with it, they're mostly flash fiction. So it'll be a short selection, and then I'm just going to read 1 chapter from the historical. So Girls Zoo, it's a FC2 book, and it is collaborative between me and my dear friend Carol Guest, who is also a fiction writer and a poet, and she's published more than 20 books, many of them collaborative. So she's an expert in collaboration, especially for books of fiction. What I'm going to read from this collection, Girls Zoo, is a piece called Girl and Ransom Note. I'm going to actually read from the book itself, from Girls Zoo, and then when I get into the historical novel, I'm going to have to switch from reading from a PDF on the screen. Okay, Girl and Ransom Note, and this is one that Carol and I wrote together. We have her and have not sold her yet, but we'll sell her at the drop of a hat. If you want her back, do as we say. She's not harmed, not damaged goods, but your inability to follow instructions could damage her beyond anyone's wildest imaginations. We have done much research about you, about her and you, and we know you would never harm her or make the mistake of talking to the police about what has happened. You already know enough about what has gone on in your own house. We have arranged this carefully. If you fail to follow instructions, she dies. The police will automatically assume you are the murderer. As the case we've created against you will be airtight, proven by DNA, blood spatter, and fingerprints, already collected and ready to be planted and set in motion before decay sets in. Please do not make us cut her fingers off to prove to you her toes or even her hair are out of the question. Do not ask to speak to her. How dumb do you think we are? Do not expect any photographs or for us to in any way prove she is alive. How stupid do you think we are? Besides, photographs can be faked. Remember, if you ever want to see her again, we are in charge. We are the only ones allowed to ask questions, make requests or demands. Now is the time to trust us, totally, completely. We are now your new God, if you want us to save her. Have faith in us and believe. She will be fine, only if you follow our instructions to the letter without question. Here are our requests, which you should do immediately without asking why we want these things done. Don't think, just do, and do fast. If you follow these instructions and do what we ask, we will know. If you deviate from our instructions, we will know. Our instructions, henceforth known as the 10 Commandments, are as follows. 1. Go to that place in your garage, the stash of old gym equipment draped in spider webs. Crawl under the trampoline to locate the big spider web where one dragonfly has been captured. Without damaging the dragonfly, remove it from the web and put it in a clear, clean jar secured by a lid with ice pick air holes. If the dragonfly is still alive, capture the spider and put it in the jar with the dragonfly. But whatever you do, don't damage the web. 2. Collect the used tissues stashed in her bedroom, under the bed and in her underwear drawer, all of them. Leave none behind. Note, under her bed and in her underwear drawer are the obvious places. There are other places for you to find. Try to think as she thought, as she thinks. Think of her alive, still thinking. 3. Inside your next door neighbor's tackle box in the top drawer, get the razor blade, not the new one, but the old rusted one, and use it to carve her initials into the least obvious tree in the park she liked best. If she didn't like one park more than the others, or if you never took her to the park, or if the park has since been paved, carve her initials into your next door neighbor's garden shed above the lawnmower. 4. Amid old perfume bottles in your neighbor's master bathroom, on the mirror tray is a hairbrush full of hair. Remove this hair and commingle it with yours and the hairbrush at home. 5. Call your neighbor every night at 6 o'clock. Hang up if they answer. Do not leave a message. 6. Buy a birthday cake, her favorite kind, red velvet. Prop up the cake so there's space underneath. Carve a hollow core into the cake from below so the surface with her name and frosting stays intact. Then fill the core with wrapping paper as if you're confused, prone to mistakes, likely to damage what matters most. 7. Ask to babysit your friend's children. Return them late. 8. Practice speaking in the present tense, even when you have your doubts, even when things happened in the past, and they did. Things happened years ago. Practice speaking of these things as if they are happening now. 9. Leave us the money we requested. This is ransom after all. Leave us money this way. $1 bill, new, not wrinkled or torn or stained or damaged. Leave $1 bill in a standard white envelope in your mailbox every 2 hours between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. every day except Sunday. When you leave the envelope in your mailbox, raise the red flag. Keep your curtains closed at all times so that you never accidentally see the courier tasked with collecting the money. Do this until we tell you to stop. 10. If you figure out who we are, even on accident, even if it's not your fault, even if it's the most unlikely scenario, a series of coincidences and bad luck all around, turn yourself in immediately and accept your punishment. If you think you figured out who we are, but you aren't sure, casually approach the person or people you think we are and say in a calm voice, "Hey, fuckwad, are you the one ruining my life?" If it's us, we will respond calmly as well and escort you to the police station where your ransom begins. Okay, so that was a piece from Girls Zoo, one of 56 stories in the collection. Next, I'm going to go to reading an early chapter of Sister Seance. It's not the first chapter, but it is in part 1. And it's just before the Halloween dinner party, which is called a dumb supper, based on an Irish superstition that was reinterpreted by Victorian Americans as a courtship ritual. The idea was to eat a meal in complete silence with one chair at the dining table to remain empty. And if you are able to eat in complete silence, then a spirit of someone who is dead will come to join you at the table. And after the dinner, everyone was to have a question that they wrote down on a piece of paper to ask someone who has died, and they were to burn these questions by candlelight. So this was reinterpreted by Victorian American people as a courtship ritual. Back in the day, Halloween parties and Halloween were more for adults than for children. And one of the major things about Halloween was that people who were eligible to be married but unmarried would oftentimes meet for things like bonfires, candle jumping, dumb suppers. My novel takes place the year that the Civil War has ended, and it begins on that Halloween after the end of the Civil War. Dan already gave you a brief summary of what the novel is about, so I'm going to launch right into the chapter. It does have funding from American Antiquarian Society, and I had a residency there, and that's where I did a lot of the research. I started it 10 years ago, so it's been a project for a while. And I'm going to read off the ARC, which is on a PDF, so you'll see me staring at the screen a lot. Okay. Moonlit alfalfa fields spread like green velvet blankets surrounding orchards and stables where jack-o'-lanterns glowed. Flames lured the last looper moths of the season, shedding golden light on morning dresses. Hundreds of pale insects with flame-lit wings fluttered like snow and wind. Near the bonfires, women with gloved hands batted looper moths. I'm hoping you guys can hear me because I can't see you at all, so you can hear me. Okay. As caterpillars, these clever insects tended to move along grasses in a looping gait, hiding from their enemies by day, feeding by night. In times of war, certain men and women survived by moving like the looper moth caterpillars, feeding in the dark, traveling to conceal themselves from others, even when they were right beside them, hiding in the same grasses, the same woods, the same buildings. It was terrifying to think people might move like that again, to hide from each other in close proximity, now that the war was over. Samson Redlaw thought the looper moth caterpillars were like soldiers who had recently hidden in fields with him, under his command in meadows, parks, along roadsides, near farmhouses burning, after they had set them ablaze. These moths, active until late autumn, seemed to be gathering in a final celebration on the fields with partygoers this evening. Ordinary looking, light brown, even ugly during the day, at night near the bonfires, the moths appeared illuminated, breathtaking, wings capturing light. Soldiers bask in the amber glow of bonfires. With amputations, prosthetics, and battle scars, these uniformed men approached women with veiled eyes, costumes obscuring downcast faces as snow-like wings fluttered around their heads. Firelight caught and ebony jewels glittering. Luminous jewelry lured moths to bejeweled women, and Samson felt grateful for his mask of leaves. "Like, take it," he said, trying to ignore "I like jewels" winking over women's bosoms near the fire. He warned Sergeant Jerry Rickett about Miss Belle Hayden's monstrous morning dress. Velvet stroked and swallowed Belle's short legs in a sensuous manner. Her tiny waist cinched tight, a girdle constricted her bosom, causing her white breasts to float on black lace like two prized peaches shelved on prominent display. Redlaw mistrusted women who had been without men too long. War had a way of making ordinary men heroes in the eyes of women. Across the twilight field, the stiff dress imprisoned Belle's body as she grinned at Samson. At some angles, her dress was like a giant black cat. At other angles, like an enormous black parasite eating her alive. If her body was a host to her costume, Samson thought many fashionable ladies were elegantly devoured by clothing. 12 candles were a lot to jump over. It was nearly impossible in a long, full, heavy skirted dress of black velvet, intricate black lace thread embroidery. The cage, far too large for Miss Belle, accentuated its architectural framework of fancy crinoline shaped like a lampshade. Trimmed in exotic rows of ebony ribbon shadowing scallops, the dress was a fire hazard. Belle hollered, running on short legs. The dress fought her all the way, the cage swinging back and forth. Her sisters howled and Lupermoss scattered. Belle skipped past candles, past wagons and horses, past jack-o'-lanterns in neat rows, far down the darkening field. Moonlight illuminated her silhouette, covered in glowing moths. Her shadow came running back to candles. Samson knew she would never make it. Leaping diminutively, she landed on the sixth candle, extinguishing it with a petite shoe before falling on the remaining candles, catching her dress afire. Damn it, Samson whispered as her sisters screamed, watching Belle burn. She made the mistake of racing away as if she could outrun the flames. Stop, Samson called. In her panic, Belle stirred the wind. Samson leapt through the air, tackling her so that she was pinned beneath his good arm. Shielding his amputation as she fought, he covered her with his body. Over 6 foot tall, he was much larger than she, struggling, panicking, fighting him. He tried to extinguish her by rolling in dirt, leaves, rotting apples. Finally, he had the fire out, though she was weeping, her dark eyes sparkling, collecting tears. He picked her up, cradled her like a frightened child. He was good with children, having once been the eldest of 6 brothers. They were all now lost to war. There, he whispered, wiping away her tears with his long ginger hair. He never carried a handkerchief, something his mother once scolded him for. All right, he said, setting Belle gently on the dirt, her skirt now burnt away. As he removed his coat, she pointed to her tiny toes, petite pale legs, exposed and singed pantaloons, raw in the dress's cage, shoes singed. Covering her with his long coat, this will keep you warm, he whispered. You saved me, she said. He grinned. She jumped up, wrapping her arms around his neck, swinging from him as if he were a tree, hugging as if she didn't want to let go. Christ, he thought. When he set her back on her feet, she gazed up at him. Hayfield wagons approached. Chris Datchery relit all 12 candles and hollered, Samson, show us how it's done. The mass crowd cheered and gathered around the candles in a wide arc, silhouetted by bonfires. Samson considered his wound, left wrist throbbing, crusted bandages covering the amputation. He had ranked first among the candle jumpers of his youth. Everyone was chanting his name. Samson ran far down the dark field through the orchard. The partygoers must have thought he had run away, the bonfire and the silhouettes tiny in the distance. Taking a breath, he raced back on his long legs. Hollering, he leapt high, clearing all the little flames. He didn't put out a single candle, and the party guests roared. That's how it's done, Jerry Ricketts said. Samson Redlaw, master candle jumper. Nothing ever keeps a good man down, not even the old sawbones. Dr. Burroughs approached, and Jerry mumbled a quick apology. At least he's still alive, the doctor said. Unlike many former soldiers who had blamed the doctor for hacking off their limbs, Samson felt no blame, though it took 3 surgeries to finish the job and the wound was still festering. Hello, doctor, Samson said, smiling down into Ian Burroughs' kind eyes. Burroughs was a small man with a big heart, and the choices he had had to make were not easy. Hard choices were how he saved so many lives. Good to see you, friend, said Dr. Burroughs, stepping onto the wagon filled with fresh hay, gleaming in moonlight. Always a ladies' man, despite his ongoing dealings with hysteria, the doctor assisted several women onto the wagon. Aged 48, the doctor had served as a field surgeon for the Union during the war. His large, steady hands were complemented by a cool head under pressure. He was deaf in his left ear from the sound of cannon fire. He often smoked a pipe and held his liquor well, despite his short stature. A skillful fisherman, Dr. Burroughs had enormous veiny forearms and keen, bloodshot eyes. See you at the dumb supper, friend, said Samson. Dr. Burroughs waved. The doctor's wagon soon filled. One woman lingered, standing back. Belle Hayden. With a sinking in his gullet, Samson realized she was waiting for him. Her marvelously austere sister, Grace Hayden, had not waited. A tall person like Samson, Grace had already boarded the first wagon near the doctor. Samson regretted there was no place for him in that wagon, the one with strong, young, slender horses driven by Chris Datchery. I'm going to skip a little bit here. Mr. Redlaw, Belle said, approaching Samson. Major General, shall we ride together? Why not? Dark eyes flinty, she stared down at her burnt shoes, her tongue lithe, flicking over pearly white teeth. Samson studied the paleness of her porcelain skin, lovely in a doll-like fashion. He helped her onto the wagon. She clung to his right arm, nestling into fresh hay, his coat wrapped over her legs like a blanket. Jerry Rickett, Hattie Grove, and Nick Dalton joined them in the wagon along with Dr. Burroughs' assistant, Mason Turner, who was Ruby's nephew and a former Confederate soldier who had once been captured and forced to care for wounded Union soldiers in the hospital camps. Samson and Mason gazed at each other with deep understanding that held neither animosity nor friendship. Gambling and gory memories were all they had in common, and that was enough. Believing a man should keep his friends close and his enemies closer, Samson studied Mason, now prematurely balding. Mason once had a lovely full head of hair before he was captured, rail thin. Mason fidgeted with his mustache. A well-groomed man with excellent false teeth and pockmarked cheeks, Mason was rumored to have come from a family who owned hundreds of men, women, and children. Aren't you going to introduce me to your little friend? Mason asked Samson as they settled into the hay. Miss Belle Hayden, said Samson, meet Mr. Mason Turner. Belle shifted uncomfortably as the wagon circled the bonfire. Samson inhaled smoky air, chewing a bit of sweet hay. Your injury, whispered Belle. How did it happen? Mason laughed and Belle blushed. Samson did neither. How he hated the questions and stares of friends and strangers alike. Everyone gawked at his stump as if it were the most interesting thing about him. Every amputation was a story waiting to be told, a sort of mystery, he supposed. And wounded men bled riddles because a soldier's body belonged to everyone. Nothing was private anymore, not to an amputee. Okay, I think I'm going to quit reading the chapter there because of time to give enough time for the questions. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for me or for Dan?
Okay, I see Kathleen. Did you put your hand up, Kathleen? Oh, that was a mistake.
I have a question. I would just love to hear. First of all, I was like very surprised and impressed, like when we were scheduling this, and Professor Mazza, and she had kind of warned me. She had said, you know, by the time this reading happens, this was even before it was rescheduled, Aimee will probably have more books ready to be published. And so I was really excited to hear about Sister Seance. And so I had, you know, that was not on my radar at all last year at this time. And so I'd love to hear, and I think I had read that you had, in like one of your bios, that you had one of the, like an archival grant. And it didn't seem like to fit with any of the other subject matter of your other 5 books. So I was very curious about that. And now that I'm learning that you've been working on it for 10 years, I would love to hear about the genesis of Sister Seance, and also how you incorporated research into it, and how long you were doing the research, and like just more about the process of that.
So the research did take 2 or 3 years, and it did start out with the concept first. I came up with the concept. I knew I wanted to write about these courtship rituals involving the holidays, especially Halloween. So it originally was called the Dumb Supper, and that's what my proposal was for the American Antiquarian Society Fellowship, which was like a grant application. And when I got that, it was a residency, so I got to stay over during the summer at the Scholars House, and also every day visit their library, which has all kinds of collections of some of them are just, you know, like books you could get at other libraries, but some of them are actual like newspapers and stuff from the time period and photographs and stuff that are the real thing, that of course you're not allowed to take them out or to handle them, some of them without gloves on. It's a very different kind of library environment. Also, there's like security check in and check out. Anyway, there's all kinds of stuff that I had access to, including the librarians and the scholars, who were very cool in terms of talking about the ideas. Originally, I just wanted to write it from the points of view of the sisters who are staying at this boarding house and are guests at the dumb supper. But some of the librarians pointed out how difficult it was for the returning soldiers, because so many of them had such severe wounds, including amputations, and how that affected courtship. So then I realized I wanted to put more in there about the soldiers and have their points of view. I knew I wanted to write about spiritualism because that was big at the time period. The novel does have a feminist theme to it, which most of my work does. But it is much different because it has more of the point of view of men in it, in addition to women's point of view. And it also has all these, there's some medical details about the body. So there's male and female characters who have amputations. Some of them were because the characters in war, of course, had that medically done. Others of them had different kinds of procedures. There was all kinds of questionable medical things that were happening to women back then as well. I mentioned hysteria thing, but there were also other kind of procedures where things would be amputated from women because they thought that would cure everything from their eyesight to anything else. So there's all kinds of like medical details in there, wounds. There's the idea of the spiritualism, which is connected to women and who was controlling their bodies, who was controlling their minds. Back then, if women were public speakers, they were called sluts. And spiritualism gave them a way to talk publicly, to make a living doing that, and to also get some respect because they could claim that their bodies were being taken over by the spirits of dead men. So there was all kinds of gender things going on there. And of course, the nation was in mourning because so many people had lost loved ones in the Civil War. So many people were desperate to try to reconnect with their loved ones that had died through spiritualism. They're trying to reconnect, and they're also wanting to know so badly what happens after death. And part of the reason for that is because back then they believed that people needed to have a good death to have a good afterlife, and a good death was at home surrounded by the family. And of course, if you died in war, you were not at home, you were not surrounded by family. So that people were really grappling with, what does this mean for my loved one that I've lost? So all those things come into it. It has many different points of views. The chapter I read was from the point of view of one of the soldiers, but also there's single women at the boarding house. There are former slaves, there are abolitionists, former slaveholders, all of them attending this dumb supper where things really start to come apart. And of course, one of the questions in the novel is it because of something supernatural, or is it because of something else that some of the characters are hiding? What took me a long time on this was structure. And I think that for longer novels, structure is such an important element for a novelist to try to get a hold of, because without it, you can write 1,000 pages and not really have something that's finished. So structure was something that I really had to teach myself, because before that, I'd written mostly short stories / fiction and short novels. So this was my first longer novel. So I really struggled with the structure, and then also how to put these details that I really liked into a form that was a story. But yeah, that's how it started with the concept, and then the residency and getting to interact with the scholars, and then years of struggling with revision and structure.
Cool.